Jai Shri Krishna, welcome everyone. So we are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavatam, Skandha 5, Discourse 24. Discourse 24 is on the position of Rahu, etc. Etc. meaning other celestial bodies and celestial lokas, and the limits of the heaven-like subterranean regions, meaning the patalas, the patala lokas. Sri Shuka went on. Some people declare that 10,000 yojanas below the sun, and as we talked about last week, when we say things like below the sun, it might not be obvious what below means. How do you define down in a three-dimensional space like that? It's below relative to the plane of Bhumandala, which mathematically corresponds to the Earth's ecliptic.
So sorry.
Yeah,
Namaste. This is Devala. This is Pandit Dheeraj.
Yeah. I didn't know you were coming. Namaste, Panditji.
But he will just speak 2 minutes or so, and then
sure, please.
Because it's very late in India. I think, is he still there? Yeah, Pandit Dheeraj, you can unmute.
Yeah, I can. I sent him an ask to unmute, but
I think you can unmute it because you are host, no?
I can ask him to unmute, but I can't. Namaste.
Pandit Dheeraj, so Pandit Dheeraj, can you hear us? आप सुन रहे हैं पंडित?
अब माता जी लोग भी गए कुछ।
ठीक है, 1 मिनट के बस आप कुछ बोल दिए। 5वां स्कंद लास्ट जो अंत वाला अध्याय है वही हम कर रहे हैं राहु के बारे में।
अब माताएं भी कुछ गाएं।
कोई बात नहीं, अगले हफ्ता तक। पंडित धीरज,
बस सस्पेंड पंडित जी को छोड़ देना।
पंडित धीरज,
There we go.
हाँ जी, राधे राधे।
क्या पंडित जी, आप हम सोच रहे थे आपको म्यूट कर दें मगर आप आ गए।
अगर आप कहे तो प्रॉब्लम नहीं है हमको, हम तो
ठीक है। 1 मिनट के लिए आप कुछ बोल सकते हैं भागवत के बारे में। हम लोग वैसे इंग्लिश में पढ़ रहे हैं यहाँ पर, सो वी आर रीडिंग इन इंग्लिश एंड आज है स्कंद 5वां स्कंद और अंत वाला अध्याय है विच इज अबाउट राहु, जहाँ पोजीशन है उसका हाँ, नहीं समुद्र मंथन अभी नहीं है ये। जहाँ 5वां स्कंद है अंत में, जहाँ पर सूर्य का रथ और सारे नक्षत्र के बारे में, शिशुमारा के बारे में बुलाया गया है वहां पर हमें।
अच्छा
तो ये अंत
अच्छा
स्कंद है, अंत वाली, सॉरी 5वां स्कंद अंत अध्याय है,
अच्छा जी अच्छा
24 अध्याय। बस 1 मिनट के लिए, क्योंकि हम दोनों हम पढ़ना चाहते हैं, सुनना चाहते हैं इंग्लिश में यहाँ पर, तो उसके
अच्छा
बारे में ठीक है, बस 1-2 मिनट, ठीक है।
जी।
जय श्री
रहुगढ़ है कि राहु है? रहुगढ़ होगा, रहुगढ़। देखिए, एक राहु होता है नवग्रह वाला, और एक रहुगण राजा थे, जड़, जिसमें जड़ भरत की कहानी आती है। जड़ भरत जैसे संत रहुगढ़ जैसे हिमानी को आत्मोपदेश देता है। पांचवें स्कंध में अंतिम अध्याय में रहुगण की कहानी है, राहु की नहीं है। हाँ जी, आवाज सुन पा रहे हैं?
हम सुन रहे पंडित जी, मगर
आप पहले कंफर्म होइए, रहुगण है या राहु है? राहु तो नहीं इसमें है, इसमें रहुगण है, जो जड़ भरत, जड़
हाँ,
भरत और रहुगण।
न वो हम पढ़ लिया है इंग्लिश में।
अच्छा
अब
अच्छा
शिशुमारा के बारे में है, जहाँ अंत में नक्षत्र है, और रहु वो राजा के बारे में
रहुगण।
नहीं, वो ग्रह के बारे में है। तो
अच्छा, ग्रह के बारे
हाँ, बस बस प्रार्थना कर लीजिएगा, और उसके बाद में हम अगले हफ्ते में बात करेंगे।
में। अच्छा
और
जी
ये
अच्छा
देवला है जो हमारे लिए पढ़ रहा है, देवला रीस, जो
अच्छा
अच्छी तरह से सब कुछ बोल रहे हैं, वो हिंदी भी समझते हैं थोड़ा थोड़ा, और
अच्छा जी अच्छा
हम विनती करके हम लोग के लिए पढ़ रहे हैं यहाँ पर। हम बहुत खुश
अच्छा
है कि देवला यहाँ इंग्लिश में पढ़ते हैं जी।
अच्छा जी, बहुत बहुत सौभाग्य की बात है।
हाँ, Devala, that is Pandit Dheeraj. He will just speak a minute or so and then will be mute. Yeah. ठीक है पंडित जी, बस 1-2 मिनट, तो उसके बारे में हम
अच्छा जी
इंग्लिश में शुरू करेंगे, बस जाइए।
अच्छा
जी जी, जय श्री राम।
श्रीमद् भागवत महापुराण के पंचम स्कंध के अंतिम अध्याय में एक और कथा आती है, रहोगण और जड़ भरत की। उसमें उन्होंने कर्म को बताते हैं कि जीवन का कर्म क्या है, मतलब मनुष्य को क्या करना चाहिए, मनुष्य जन्म मिलने के बाद क्या करना चाहिए। तो उस पर जड़ भरत जी कहते हैं, अहो अनीसाम किम कार्य शोभनम प्रसन्न हे साम सुदत तवयम हरे ऐर्जन्म लब्धम रसुभारताजिरे मुकुंद सेवौ पैकम स्पृशाहिनः। जड़ भरत कहते हैं कि ये मनुष्य जो जन्म है, देवता भी तरसते हैं मानव बनने के लिए, क्योंकि 84 लाख योनि बदलने के बाद मनुष्य जन्म मिलता है। गोस्वामी जी कहते हैं कि बड़े भाग मानुष तन पावा, सुर दुर्लभ सब ग्रंथन गावा। यानी जन्म जन्मांतर के जब पुण्य उदय होते हैं, तब हमें मनुष्य योनि मिलती है, यानी मानव। तो प्रार्थना करते हैं कि हे भगवान, मनुष्य शरीर मिलो तो केवल भारतवर्ष में मिले, यानी जहाँ धर्म हो, जहाँ एक दूसरे का लोग सहयोग करें, जहाँ लोग एक दूसरे की भावना को समझें, जहाँ लोगों के अंदर मानवता हो, जीवों के प्रति दया हो। क्योंकि जो सुख इस पवित्र भूमि पर है वो स्वर्ग में नहीं मिलता है। यानी जो सुख हो परोपकार करने से मिलता है, दूसरों की सेवा करने से मिलता है, वो सुख स्वर्ग में नहीं मिलता है। हम पृथ्वी लोक में कथा सुन सकते हैं, भगवान की पूजा कर सकते हैं, मंदिर जा सकते हैं, लेकिन स्वर्ग लोक में ऐसा नहीं है। तो वो कहते हैं कि मनुष्य जन्म यदि हमें मिले पृथ्वी लोक में, तो भारतवर्ष में मिले, जहाँ सत्कर्म होते रहते हैं, जहाँ पुण्य होते रहते हैं, जहाँ यज्ञ होते रहते हैं, जहाँ हवन होते रहते हैं, और जहाँ लोग हमेशा कर्म में लगे रहते हैं। कर्म प्रधान विश्व चिराखा, जो जस करहि सो तस फल चाखा। यानी जैसा कर्म करोगे वैसा ही फल आपको मिलेगा, ऐसा भागवत महापुराण में कहा गया है, और गीता जी में भी कहा गया है, कर्मण देवाधिकारस्ते मां फलेषु कदाचन। हे मनुष्य, कर्म कर, फल की इच्छा मत कर, क्योंकि फल तो मिलेगा ही। ये प्रकृति का नियम है कि आप जैसा कर्म करेंगे, अच्छा कर्म करेंगे तो अच्छा फल मिलेगा, और बुरा कर्म करेंगे तो बुरा फल मिलेगा। इसीलिए कर्मयोगी स उच्यते, कर्मयोगी यानी जो कर्म करने वाले व्यक्ति होते हैं उनको श्रेष्ठ माना गया है। तो कहने का तात्पर्य यही है कि अच्छे कर्म करते रहें, और पृथ्वी लोक में ही स्वर्ग है, यही मोक्ष है, यही स्वर्ग है। यानी अच्छा आनंद जी अपने जीते जी आनंद प्राप्त करे, ध्यान के द्वारा, समाधि के द्वारा, परोपकार के द्वारा, दूसरों के हेल्प के द्वारा, दया के द्वारा, दान के द्वारा, यज्ञ के द्वारा, तो यही स्वर्ग है और यही नरक है। कोई ये आशा ना करे कि यहाँ का कर्म हम स्वर्ग लोक में जाकर भोगेंगे। यहाँ आप जैसा करेंगे यही आपको भोगना पड़ेगा। यहाँ अच्छा करेंगे तो आपको अच्छा मिलेगा, और बुरा करेंगे तो बुरा मिलेगा। इसी के साथ अपने वाणी को विराम। जय श्री कृष्ण।
Jai Shri Krishna. Thank you so much, Panditji. Panditji joined us from India. He's actually in his ashram, so kind of busy. And Panditji, there is a question, I think. 1 second.
हाँ जी, कर सकते हैं।
मगर वो क्वेश्चन के बारे में इंग्लिश में या हिंदी में, the Prabhu Sunil ji asked a question. He said, Sunil ji, you want to ask yourself? Sunil ji? Prabhu Sunil, can you hear me?
Yes, Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
I raised the question. Pandit said in Hindi, I think. I'm not sure whether it was Hindi or English.
Hindi. Bolo.
He said that as a human, मुझे हिंदी में बात करना है।
आप इंग्लिश में कर सकते हैं या हिंदी में, it's okay, but I was thinking maybe we can ask this question in our Hindi section. So if you can hold on to that question so that we can start reading. And
Okay.
yeah, is
No
that okay, Prabhu ji? Yeah.
No problem, no problem.
अच्छा ठीक है, जय श्री राम. So Pandit Dhira, we will continue reading. हम अब इंग्लिश में पढ़ने जा रहे हैं, तो हम आप अगले फिर मिलेंगे आपसे. ओके,
हाँ जी,
बहुत धन्यवाद, बहुत धन्यवाद आप आए, आप बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. जय श्री राम, जय श्री कृष्ण.
जय श्री राम. yes, we are. Yeah, so that was actually a good point. My Hindi is not that great, but I was pretty much following what he was saying about Rahu's role in managing and delivering karma, and the very good point that it can create the experience of svarga or naraka, regardless of where we were born. Even here in Prithviloka and so on. And it is a traditional point Sunil, I know you can ask Panditji your question later in the Hindi group if you want, but the point of the blessing of being born in Bharata Khandam is very much given in the Shastras as being an opportunity of high karma, especially, of course, at the time the Shastras were written. In many other parts of the world, this knowledge would be hard to come by. But even still today, there's a lot of availability of gurus and acharyas and spiritual teachings that aren't easy to just come by on the internet or so on. There's a lot of deep parampara lineages of knowledge that are still available in Bharat that are hard to find elsewhere. But I'm sure he can go into more depth about that.
But there's also a lot of distortion of information, and
yeah,
that's
there is.
Yeah, and that's why it's good to go back to scripture and read and see what is right or not, because people like to exaggerate, like it's yoga, and they do all kinds of stuff. There's bear yoga and all that stuff, and it's just a lot of misinformation, so
there is
anyway.
Yeah.
Let's continue. Thank you so much again, Deola. Thank you.
So in discourse 24 of Bhagavatam, Sri Shuka went on, some people declare that 10,000 yojanas below the sun, and I wanted to explain what's meant by below the sun, since it's not obvious, since we're talking about how do you define up and down in a three-dimensional space like that. It's up and down are relative to the plane of Bhumandala, which is mathematically the plane of the ecliptic of the earth, which essentially is a flat plane that you can draw through space, which would divide, in astronomical terminology, divides the sky into the northern and southern astrological hemispheres, which is what is meant by up and down. So 10,000 yojanas below the sun relative to that plane is where Rahu moves about like a lunar mansion, like a nakshatra in terms of its revolution through the signs of the zodiac. The deity presiding over it, who was by birth a vile demon, having been born of Singhika, that's the name of Rahu's mother, Singhika, a lioness, attained by the grace of the Lord immortality and the rank of a graha, though unworthy of these. Of his birth and deeds, O dear son, we shall narrate later on. They declare the sphere of the burning sun that shines yonder as 10,000 yojanas, that of the moon as 12,000, and that of Rahu as 13,000 yojanas in extent. Rahu, who assails the sun and the moon on the day when the two dwell together, meaning line up relative to us, causing an eclipse, and the day of the full moon. So when the two dwell together is a new moon, and then on the day of the full moon, nursing a grudge against them ever since he interposed himself between them. This all refers to the Samudramantaram story, which we'll get into later on in the Bhagavatam. Seeing the celebrated and favorite missile of the Lord, Sudarshana by name, the Sudarshana Chakram, placed by him by the side of both the aforesaid, Surya and Chandra, for their protection, on coming to know their plight, and formidable by its splendor, constantly revolving, Rahu stands facing it for an hour or so, meaning for a muhurta, for 48 minutes, shaking with fear and bewildered at heart, and retreats even from a distance. It is this incident that people refer to as an eclipse. At approximately the same number of yojanas below Rahu, as Rahu lies below the sun relative to this ecliptic plane, lie the abodes of the Siddhas, Charanas, and Vidyadharas, various celestial lokas of different types of beings. Below these lies the aerial region, or Bhuvarloka, the sports ground of the hosts of yakshas, rakshasas, pishachas, pretas, and bhutas, extending as far as the wind fiercely blows and clouds are met with. So within the Earth's atmosphere, above the Earth, but where there are clouds and wind, so within the atmosphere. At a distance of 100 yojanas below that lies this Earth, extending as far as the foremost of birds, such as the swans, vultures, hawks, and eagles soar. The situation of the Earth, as well as the arrangement of its parts, has been described as it is. Even below the Earth, there exist 7 holes in the Earth, or 7 subterranean regions, situated at a distance of 10,000 yojanas from one another, 10,000 yojanas in depth, below the plane of Bhumandala, and each extending to the length and breadth of 10,000 yojanas. Their names, counting down from the top like a stack, are Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala. Often all of them together are referred to as Patala or as the Patalas, but technically Patala is just the lowest one, and the others have their own names. In the houses, gardens, pleasure grounds, and stadia in these heaven-like subterranean regions, houses, etc., exuberantly rich in sensuous enjoyments, affluence, and joy born of power, surpassing even those enjoyments, affluence, and joy enjoyed in heaven, meaning in Svargaloka, the heaven of the devas of Indra and so on, live as householders, Daityas and Danavas and Nagas, whose wives and children, relations and kinsmen and servants are ever highly delighted and devoted, whose desires are never thwarted even by the most powerful devas, and who divert themselves with their uncanny skill in various arts. In these regions, O Maharaja Parikshit, shine forth cities built by the miraculous architect Maya, in this case meaning Mayasura, and richly adorned with wonderful houses, defensive walls, gates, town halls, places of worship, quadrangles. Quadrangles are like town squares, but the Sanskrit word used references the fact that they may not be true equilateral squares, so quadrangles, and resting places, etc., built of various excellent gems of best type, as well as with grand mansions of the lords of these regions, whose terraces are crowded with pairs of nagas and asuras, pigeons and parrots, and mainas. Mainas are the type of bird, the maina bird. The gardens, too, surpassingly dim the glory of the celestial world, meaning Svarga, by the splendor, delighting the mind and senses, of trees whose charming boughs are weighed down by bunches of flowers and fruits and lovely young leaves, and which are embraced by the body of creepers, meaning creeper vines that twine around trees. Of their lakes, etc., full of limpid water and resorted to by various species of birds living singly as well as in pairs. And they excel the heavenly world of Svargaloka by the sweet and varied notes of birds that have taken up their abode in the beds of lotuses and lilies, kuvalayas and kalharas, blue and red, lotuses and lotuses with 100 petals in the water of those lakes, etc., shaken by the leaping of fish. Notes, meaning of bird calls, that bring a feast of joy and are confused by their uninterrupted sport. There indeed, they say, no fear caused by divisions of time such as day and night is observed, because they don't suffer from age and death by old age, and so they have no anxiety about the passing of time. As a matter of fact, in those regions, the gems on the hoods of the foremost of the great Nagas drive away all darkness. Nor indeed do anxieties and ailments, wrinkles, gray hairs, and old age, etc., paleness of the body, foul smell, perspiration, fatigue, and languor, these as well as the other changes in the body due to age, do not afflict those residing in these regions, because of their use of miraculous herbs, saps, elixirs, foods and drinks, baths, and so on. In fact, death from no cause except from the might of the Lord going by the name of his chakra prevails against those blessed souls. The moment that chakra enters those regions, the embryos in the Asura women generally slip out in their earlier or later stages of development through sheer fear. Meaning that they, just from the sheer terror, any pregnant women in the patalas miscarry or else give birth prematurely. Now in Atala, the uppermost of the Talas, lives Balasura, son of Maya, by whom indeed they say were released or were published 96 conjuring tricks, some of which conjurers practice even today, like illusionary tricks or stage magic. From the mouth of this Asura, even as he was yawning, sprang up 3 groups of women called Svairinis, Kaminis, and Punchalis, 3 different types of very sexually promiscuous women, as Asuri women tend to be. These women render a man, if a man happens to enter this subterranean region, they render him sexually fit by an elixir called hataka, and afford them sexual delight at will, so they say, by their dalliances and sportive glances, love-begotten smiles, affectionate talks and embraces, etc. When that elixir is taken, a man begins to feel that he is all-powerful, that he is all-perfect, and thinking himself as possessing the strength of 10,000 mighty elephants, brags like one blinded by intoxication. Below that, below Atala, in Vitala, the next one down, resides Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe. There he is called Hatakeshvara, because he is the source of the Hataka elixir, this aphrodisiac intoxicating elixir used by the Asuras. He dwells there surrounded by troops of ghosts forming his retinue and united with his spouse. He also is called there Bhava, and he is there united with his spouse from multiplying the creation of Brahma, meaning that they have children there. From him has issued the great river Hataki, the river of the Hataka elixir, charged with the energy of both Lord Bhava and the goddess Bhavani, where fire kindled by the wind absorbs with vigor the water, and the same, thrown out in the form of froth, is condensed into the variety of gold, known by the name of Hataka gold. So the fire-dried and hardened form of this elixir, which both males and females, who are equally strong there, in the Patala Lokas, unlike here, where males tend to be physically stronger than females, there is no difference in physical strength between the sexes. And both males and females in the gymnasiums, meaning the gardens and pleasure houses, etc., of the Asura chiefs, wear the Hataka gold in the form of ornaments. Below that, below Vitala Loka, in the next one down, Sutala, resides, free from fear, even to this day, Bali of sacred renown, Mahabali, the Asura Maharaja, the illustrious son of Virochana, robbed of the three worlds by the Lord, who in order to please the mighty Indra, the chief of the Devas, descended through Aditi and appeared in the form of a celibate dwarf. This refers, of course, to Vamana Avatara. He was admitted, Mahabali was admitted into the rulership of Sutala through the Lord's very grace and endowed once more with overflowing wealth, which is not forthcoming even with Indra and others, so more wealth and splendor than even Indra has. And Mahabali continues to worship the same adorable Lord through the performance of his dharma. The fortune which is enjoyed by Bali in the subterranean region of Sutala is certainly not the direct result of the gift of land that he made to Vamana, inasmuch as it was duly bestowed with supreme piety and with a calm and composed mind full of highest regard on the celebrated Lord Vasudeva, the abode of the whole universe, the supreme spirit, the very animating life and soul of all species of living beings, the holiest recipient presenting himself. And therefore, the gift which Mahabali made was not one that would be conducive to earthly rewards, but one that would be directly conducive to final moksha. A man helplessly uttering his name, the Lord's name, even only once while sneezing, falling down, or stumbling, and on such occasions, actually shakes off without delay, it is said, the shackles of karma, the means of overcoming which the seekers of liberation find in altogether different processes, such as karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, etc. Meaning that even if you just trip and as kind of like a thoughtless little thing, say the name of the Lord once, even then it will help you toward moksha, such as the power of the holy name. So how much more efficacious is it if you're actually pouring your consciousness and your devotion into it? Hence the fortune of Mahabali could not be the fruit of the gift made as to one's own self to the Lord, who is the very self of all, particularly of those who have attained self-realization, who bestows his own self upon his devotees. Nor indeed can it be said that the Lord showered his grace on Indra, and that he bestowed on him only the illusory pleasures of sense and affluence, which, on the other hand, take away the remembrance of the Lord himself. For, robbed of all the three worlds and of everything except his mere body, and thrown into a mountain cave, tightly bound with the cords of Varuna by the Lord under the pretext of begging for 3 paces of land, because the Lord found no other means of depriving Mahabali, since he couldn't dharmically just attack him or kill him, since Mahabali was behaving in perfect dharmic accord. Bali actually uttered the following memorable words: "Alas, this glorious god who is called Indra is surely not clever in attaining the object of life, in that he, whose counselor is Brahaspati, exclusively chosen for deliberation, ignored that sage, his guru Brahaspati, and asked me through Lord Vamana himself for the three worlds, and on no account the service of that Lord. In other words, that when Indra earned a boon from Vamana, his guru Brahaspati advised him to ask for the boon to be made a perfect servant of the Lord, but instead Indra asked for the three worlds. Mahabali said, of what account are these three worlds which change hands at the end of a manvantara, a fraction of time, whereas time has an infinite duration, and the service of the Lord can give you eternal rewards? It is well known that my grandfather, the Mahabhakta Prahlada, asked for the Lord's service only, but not the throne of his father Hiranyakashipu, which had no fear from any quarter, even though it was being offered by the Lord on the latter's death, because that throne was something other than the Lord, and the Bhakta Prahlad cared only for the Lord. What individual like me, whose passions have not been attenuated, and who has totally rejected the Lord's grace, can possibly hope to tread in the footsteps of that noble soul Prahlada? The narrative of Bali will be told at length later on, at whose door stays mace in hand the divine Narayana himself, the adored of the whole universe, Narayana whose heart is full of compassion for his devotees, and by whom Ravana was thrown 100 million yojanas away with his toe in the course of his conquest of the quarters. Below Sutala Loka, in the next one down, Talatala, resides the Asura chief Maya by name, the lord of Tripura, the three cities, who had all his three cities reduced to ashes by Lord Shiva, and his eagerness to bring happiness to all the three worlds. This is a very famous story of Lord Shiva as Tripurantaka. I don't think it's given in detail anywhere in the Bhagavatam. It's given in other Puranas. But Mayasura secured a footing in Talatala by Lord Shiva's grace. He is the teacher of those who are expert in conjuring tricks, stands protected on all sides by that Mahadeva, Lord Shiva, and is, because of Lord Shiva's protection, he is even immune from fear of the Sudarshana Chakra of Lord Vishnu, and is held in great respect. Below Talatala, in the next one down, Mahatala Loka, lives a many-headed brood of Nagas born of Kadru. Kadru is the mother of all Nagas and of all serpents, an ancient serpent goddess.
Annie, good night. Good morning.
A many-headed brood of Nagas born of Kadru called the Krodhavashas, a clan of Nagas called the Krodhavasha Nagas. The chiefs of them being named Kuhaka, Takshaka, Kaliya, Sushena, and so on. Though possessed of gigantic form, they are constantly afraid of Garuda, the lord of birds, who carries on his back Lord Vishnu, the supreme person. Sometimes they sport recklessly through attachment to their wives, offspring, relations, and kinsmen. Below that, below Talatala, in Rasatala, reside, like serpents, the sons of Diti and Danu, known as a subcategory of the Daityas and Danavas, known as the Panis, who are divided into three classes. The three classes of the Panis are the Nivata Kavachas, the Kaleyas, and the denizens of Hiranyapura. So the Panis, these are a type of asuras who dwell down here. They're referenced in the Vedas extensively. The Nivata Kapachas are also famous in the Mahabharata. There's a battle between them and Arjuna on behalf of Indra. The denizens of Hiranyapura mean the denizens of the golden city. Hiranyapura is a golden city of Daityas in Rasatala Loka, ruled over by Varuna Deva. Enemies of the Devas The Panis are very powerful and extremely daring by birth, their pride of strength being quelled only by the brilliant weapon of Sri Hari, the divine Lord whose glory pervades all the worlds. Thanks to the threats in the form of sacred texts employed by Sarama, the female messenger of Indra, they are afraid of that ruler of the Devas. This refers to a whole Vedic story of Sarama Devi. Sarama Devi is a dog goddess of the Devas, who, when the Panis stole all the cows of the earth, Sarama Devi, the dog of Indra, tracked them down. And Sarama is, in addition to being the goddess of dogs, she's also a Vedic Rishika herself. There are some verses in the Vedas that Sarama is the Rishi of, in which she describes this encounter she had with the Pani Asuras in their caves. And so that's what's being referenced here, that she made threats to them and asserted her power over them, and Indra's authority over the cows. Interestingly, we've been talking all about the Danavas and the Daityas who live in the Patalas and describing the different talas and the different lokas down there. Just a quick little mention here. Danava, meaning the children of Danu, and they're being described like this. These beings are not only known in India. For example, in ancient pre-Christian Ireland, they talked about a race of beings very much like these, dwelling in hollow underworlds beneath the earth. They called them the Tuatha De Danann, meaning the children of Danu. They remember talking about Danavas, knew that they were called Danavas, knew about Danu, described them in very much the same way, extremely similar descriptions of their lokas and so on. So I just found it interesting that specifically the Danavas, the children of Danu, were known as far off as Ireland under the same name and described in a bunch of different cultures' ancient texts. So below Rasatala, in the region of Patala, dwell the lords of the realm of the Nagas, Shankha, Kulika, Mahashankha, Shveta, Dhananjaya, Dhritarashtra, Shankarchuda, Kambala, Ashvatara, Devadatta, and others, provided with extensive hoods and extremely furious by nature. The chief of them is Vasuki. The big and shining gems fixed on the hoods of these serpents that are possessed of 5, 7, 10, 100, or even 1,000 heads drive away by their splendor the mass of darkness prevailing in the region of Patala. Thus ends the 24th discourse in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 25, a supplement to the description of the subterranean system. Sri Shuka resumed, at a distance of 30,000 yojanas below Patala resides that part manifestation of the Lord, that Anshavatara, presiding over destruction, who is known as Lord Ananta. This is the Sheshanaga, in whom the followers of the Sattvata cult, the Sattvatas are one of the Vaishnava Sampradayas, speak of as Sankarshana, because it is he who fully draws together the subject, the perceiver, and the object, that which is perceived, by presiding over the ego, and is characterized by the I consciousness. Being supported on only one of the heads of the Lord, appearing in the form of Ananta Shesha with 1,000 heads, this terrestrial globe, as if resting on just one of his 1,000 heads, looks to him like a mustard seed. That's how vast he is relative to our earth. From between the agitated eyebrows, knit in anger, yet possessing a peculiar charm of the same Lord, when he intends to dissolve this universe at the proper time, springs up the god of destruction called Sankarshana, appearing in 11 forms, with 3 eyes and holding up a trident. This refers to the 11 Rudras. Bowing along with the foremost of devotees with exclusive and intense devotion, the Lord of the serpent demons indeed behold in the ruddy and spherical nails, bright as rubies, of his pair of lotus feet, meaning his toenails as they bow to his feet. their most charming faces, with the cheeks brightened by the sheen of their brilliant earrings, the sight of which fills their mind with rapture. Painting with pigment like paste of aloe wood, sandalwood, and saffron, the bright, long, snow white, elegant, and charming arm, strikingly set in the lovely sphere of his body like silver pillars, and seeking blessings. The unmarried princesses of the serpent demons, it is said, put on winsome and graceful smiles under the sway of love stealing into their hearts, thrilled with the touch of his person, and bashfully look at his lotus-like face, delighted through love and inebriety, with his ruddy eyes swimming through intoxication and casting a merciful look at them. The self-same Lord Ananta, an ocean of endless virtues, the most ancient deity, resides there for the welfare of the worlds, having restrained the force of his indignation and wrath, which he will let forth at the time of the pralaya. He is being meditated upon by hosts of devas and asuras, nagas and siddhas, gandharvas and vidyadharas and hermits, and is ever cheerful through inebriety, has rolling and restless eyes, and continues to delight his attendants as well as the leaders of the heavenly hosts with the nectar of his most charming speech. Clad in blue and having only one earring, he has one of his graceful and beautiful hands placed on the top of a plow. And while like the great elephant of the mighty Indra wearing its girth of gold, Lord Sankarshana of beneficent activity wears his own sylvan wreath named Vaijayanti, whose elegance is enhanced by the melodious humming of swarms of bees drunk with the fragrant and sweet honey of the fresh tulsi blossoms of unfading loveliness. So this form called Ananta or Sankarshana is the same form often known under the name of Balarama. Heard of as aforesaid from the mouth of a guru and being contemplated upon, Sankarshana enters the heart of the seekers of liberation and quickly breaks asunder the knot of ignorance formed in their heart as a result of tendencies to action, existing from time without beginning, and constituted of sattva, rajas, and tamas. The glorious Narada, son of Brahma the self-born, duly extolled with Tumburu in the court of Brahma the glories of the self-same Lord. So Tumburu is a famous Gandharva, and he's a famous bard, like a singer and musician. That's what Gandharvas tend to be known for. So once Narada and Tumburu kind of put on a duo performance together in Brahma's court, in which they said, "How can one possibly know in reality the ways of that Brahma by whose thought the modes of Prakriti, Sattva, and so on, which are responsible for the creation, continuation, and dissolution of this universe, are able to function, whose character is eternal and uncaused, inasmuch as, though one, it bore in itself this multiform universe. The same Brahman, in which appears as distinct this manifest and unmanifest creation, assumed out of abounding compassion for us a form, consisting of sattva, entirely pure, by which he chose to enact faultless sports in order to captivate the minds of his devotees, possessed as he is of unlimited energy like a lion. If a fallen man in distress utters his name, heard or even by chance, or even in a spirit of ridicule, mocking the divine name, he wipes out at once all the sin, even of other men. Whom other than Lord Shesha should one seeking liberation have recourse to? Who can exhaust by counting, even if endowed with 1,000 tongues, the exploits of that infinite Lord, Ananta Shesha, whose prowess cannot at all be measured because of its unlimited nature, and on whose head has been placed the terrestrial globe with mountains, rivers, oceans, and living beings, like a mere atom to him, while he is possessed of 1,000 such heads. Such is the glory of Lord Ananta, possessed of infinite strength and numberless virtues and potencies, who supports the earth as a sport for the maintenance of the entire creation, resting below the earth, himself supported by his own self. These indeed are the only destinations in this universe to be reached by men seeking desired blessings, according to their actions and created by God. All the various lokas which we have described. They have been described as I was taught by my revered father and guru, the sage Veda Vyasa. I have described at length in response to your queries the diverse destinies, high and low, reached as a reward of virtue in the form of activity practiced by man, which are only so many, O Raja. What else shall we discourse upon? Thus ends the 25th discourse on a supplement to the description of the subterranean system in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 26. I think this might, yes, this is the last discourse of Book 5. So I think we'll have this one and then end Book 5 for today, and next week we can start Book 6. So Discourse 26, a description of the infernal regions, or the narakas. So this is going to be a dark one, describing the hells. The Raja Parikshit asked, how is this heterogeneity in the universe to be accounted for, O Maharshi? The sage, Sri Shuka, replied, a doer being swayed by the three gunas, the destinies reached through the various actions vary according to the faith by which those actions are prompted, and which is also of three kinds, according as it is sattvika, rajasika, and tamasika in character. And all destinies are attained more or less by everyone, meaning that every jiva will attain at some point through their long transmigration, most, perhaps not all, but most, a general wide range of the different possibilities. Exactly in the same way, the fruit of action accruing to a perpetrator of sin, which is distinguished by the interdiction attaching thereto, varies according to the diverse types of faith. Accordingly, we shall now describe the more prominent of the thousands of states ordained by God and resulting from sins committed by those who cherish desires through ignorance prevailing from time without beginning. The Raja inquired, are the infernal regions referred to by you, O divine sage, particular spots on the face of the earth, or are they located outside the egg-shaped universe, or inside it? The sage replied, they lie within this universe, below the earth and above the water on the southern side. The water refers to that half of the spherical egg-shaped Brahmanda is said to be full of water. It's called the Garbha Samudra, formed, it said, of the sweat of Garbhodakasai Vishnu. This is all described elsewhere in detail, but that's what that references to. In that quarter reside the groups of the Pitris called the Agnishvatas and so on, contemplating on the Lord through supreme concentration of mind and invoking only real blessings on their scions, their descendants who now live. There also, it is said, resides the glorious Yama son of Vivasvan, the ruler of the Pitris, along with his attendants, and inflicts punishment in the same form as the crime itself on the departed jivas, brought to his realm by his servants, strictly in proportion to the sin attaching to their deeds, taking care not to violate the commands of the Almighty Lord. Meaning that whatever suffering is experienced in the narakas is precisely proportionate to the suffering caused by the doer of the karma who sent themselves there. Some actually declare the number of hells in that region as 21. Now, we are going to describe them to you, O Raja, in order, along with reference to their name, appearance, and character. They are named as Tamisra, Anthatamisra, Raurava, Maharaurava, Kumbhipaka, Kalasutra, Asipatravana, Sukaramukha, Anthakupa, Krimibhojana, Samdansha, Taptasurmi, Vajrakantaka Shalmali, Vaitarani, Puyoda, Pranarodha, Vishasana, Lalabhaksha, Sarameyadana, Avici, and Ayahpana, including 7 more. So some people say there's 21, but Shuka knows about 7 more that those people don't know about. So there's 7 more. Ksharakardama, Rakshogana Bhojana, Shula Prota, Dandashuka, Avatanirodhana, Parayavartana, and Suchimukha. There are 28 narakas, places where tortures of various kinds are gone through by the sinful. Of these, he who takes away another's wealth, child, or wife is indeed bound with the cords of death and forcibly thrown by the most dreadful servants of Yama into the naraka called Tamisra. Being tormented in that utterly dark region by being deprived of food and water, belabored with cudgels and severely scolded, and with other tortures, the jiva is filled with dismay and falls into a swoon that very moment. Even so, he indeed who enjoys the wife, etc., of another by deceiving the man is cast into Andatamisra. Being thrown into that naraka and undergoing the tortures, the jiva is deprived through agony of its consciousness and vision, like a tree which is being cut at the root. Hence they call this naraka Antatamisra, which means that which is full of blinding darkness. Again, he indeed who fondly nourishes from day to day his own family, exclusively through hostility to other living beings in the world, regarding the body alone as his self and the objects of this world as his own, leaves them here, his body and all his attachments, and himself alone falls into Raurava because of the sin resulting from such hostility to all life other than himself and his own family. Further, the very creatures that were killed by him here are born as Rurus in the other world and kill the same fellow when he goes through the tortures inflicted by Yama in the same way as they were killed by him. So Rurus here means like the black antelope. So this is especially referring to cruel hunters and people who support their family entirely by killing and causing suffering to other beings. Hence they speak of that region as Raurava, the abode full of Rurus, or the Naraka of the antelopes. Ruru here being the name of a creature more ferocious than a snake. Quite similar is Maharaurava, or the Maharaurava Rurus, called Kravyadas, which are flesh-eating beasts, which kill for the sake of flesh the man who solely nourishes his own body at the expense of others, not even supporting his own family, but only himself, and falls into that region. Again, in Kumpipaka, in that region, the servants of Yama fry in boiling oil that merciless fellow, censured even by the Rakshasas, who is actually so cruel as to cook beasts and birds alive. Further, he who is hostile to his father, a Brahmana or the Vedas, is thrown into the Naraka called Kala Sutra, a burning level sheet of copper, having a circumference of 10,000 yojanas and being excessively heated above and below by the sun and fire, the sun above and fire below. And his mind and body being tormented with hunger and thirst, he continues, for as many 1,000 years as there are hair on the body of a beast, sitting, lying down and rolling about, and springing on his feet and running in every direction. Him again who actually deviates here from the path chalked out by him for the Vedas, otherwise than in an emergency, and embraces a heretic creed, the servants of Yama throw into Asipatravana and beat with a whip, actually running there to and fro with all his limbs being torn by the sword-like leaves, sharp-edged on both sides of the palmyra trees in that grove, and crying, "I am finished." He drops down unconscious at every step through excessive agony, and apostate as he is, reaps the fruit of his sin, of the sin attaching to heretics. Evidently, this is followers of heretic creeds that cause suffering, like people like the Thuggi cult, who, in false worship of the goddess Mahakali, were used to abduct and torture and murder travelers and so on. Again, a Raja or a Raja's officer who inflicts punishment on those undeserving, or corporal punishment on a Brahmana, such an atrocious soul falls hereafter into the Naraka known as Sukaramukha. with his limbs being crushed by most powerful hands, even as a piece of sugarcane is crushed here. He is filled with consternation, shrieking in a piteous tone and now fainting, even like men who were detained by him here and tortured by him here, though they had not been found guilty. So like tyrants or abusive, oppressive rulers. Again, he indeed, whose mode of life in this world has been determined by the cosmic person himself, and by whom the agony of others is understood, and who nonetheless, knowing his dharma and knowing that he's causing suffering, still inflicts pain on creatures whose means of living have been similarly determined by God and are in their dharma, and by which the agony of others is not known, descends after death into antakupa because of his hatred towards other creatures. Being actually hated on all sides in that region by deer and other beasts, birds and reptiles, mosquitoes and lice, bugs and flies and other living beings, whatsoever were killed by him here, out of pure hatred and adharma, he has his sleep and peace of mind disturbed, and finding no rest, roams about in darkness, just as the jiva remains restless in an unsound body. Again, he who eats here whatever he can get without sharing it and without performing the pancha yajnas, in other words, who hoards and is without any kind of gratitude, has been likened to a crow and falls hereafter into the worst of narakas, called krimi bhojana. Born as a worm in a pool full of worms, 100,000 yojanas in extent, the fellow who ate food, a part of which had neither been given to others nor offered as oblation to the fire, lives there on worms, himself preyed upon by those very worms, and subjects himself to tortures for as many years as there are yojanas constituting the extent of that pool, unless the sin was already expiated by him. Meaning that just that because you do these things, it does not guarantee that you will go to Naraka. You might go through your bad karma here on earth or do other good things and expiate it. This is just if you're like deeply corrupt and a person who was incredibly, their whole life was defined only by greed and without any kind of kindness to make up for it. Again, the servants of Yama, O Parikshit, tear hereafter in the Sandansha Naraka with red hot balls of iron or pairs of nippers the skin of the man who actually takes away here by theft or force gold or jewels, etc., belonging to a brahmana, or otherwise than an emergency warranting such a course to anyone else. Again, thrashing with a whip hereafter in Tapta Surmi Naraka, the man who copulates with a woman when such a use is inappropriate, meaning rapists primarily, and the woman who unites sexually with a man, likewise. The servants of Yama force the man to embrace a red-hot iron image of a woman, and the woman a similar image of a male. So that one is generally interpreted by by commentators as referring to rapists, that they are forced to have sex with red-hot iron. And him who actually commits here sexual intercourse with all, including animals, by force, when he reaches the infernal region called Vajrakantaka Shalmani. Hereafter, they place on a silk cotton tree bristling with adamantine thorns and drag him on it. Again, those kshatriyas, or officers of a king, who transgress here the bounds of piety, even though they have not embraced a heretic creed, but who oppose, essentially soldiers who by military force oppress the Vedic religion, fall on their death into Vaitarani for having violated the restrictions, being gnawed in that river, which serves as a most round Naraka, so like a circular river, and carries in its flood ordure, urine, pus, blood, hair, nails, bones, fat, flesh, and marrow by hosts of aquatic animals here and there, yet not disunited from their body or life and sustained by their own sin. They feel distressed by the thought of the fruit of their deeds. Again, they who, having kept here a low caste woman and cast to the winds all purity, pious conduct, and restrictions, lead the life of a beast, abandoning all shame, fall into death into an ocean-like pond called Puyoda, full to the brim. So someone whose consciousness is brimming with impurity in a very extreme sense. go into the Puyoda pond, full to the brim with pus, feces, urine, phlegm, and dirt, and feed exclusively on that most detestable stuff, because it's what they're drawn to. They were drawn to filth and impurity here. Again, the servants of Yama pierce in the Naraka called Prani Nirodha with arrows as a target those Brahmanas and others who on their death, who rearing dogs and donkeys here and taking delight in the chase, actually kill animals otherwise than as enjoined. So meaning who raise animals just to kill them for sport, people who do dog fighting and cockfighting or things like that. And again, those in charge of the Naraka put to torture and then hacked to pieces in the other world, those hypocrites who actually slaughter animals here in yajnas performed for mere show to deceive others when they fall into the Naraka called Vaishasa, or also called Vishasana. Again, they throw into a river of semen, the Naraka known as Lalabhaksha in the other world, that sinful Dvija who, blinded by passion, actually causes his wife belonging to the same caste to drink semen here and make her drink his fill of that semen. Again, 720 hounds with adamantine teeth, which are no other than the messengers of Yama, representing the number of days in a year, indeed voraciously munch in the other world in the Naraka called Sarameyadana, those robbers, kings, or soldiers of a king's army who, resorting to arson and poisoning, loot villages and companies of merchants traveling together. He again, who actually tells a lie here while giving evidence in a lawsuit, in bartering goods or while making a gift on any account whatsoever, is hurled headlong after death from a mountaintop 100 yojanas high into the Naraka called Avichimat, where there is no support to stand upon and where land with a rocky surface appears like water, hence the name Avichimat, which literally means having no water. There the man does not die, even though his body continues to be shattered to minute particles and falls down the moment he is lifted up again. Again, if a Brahmana or his wife or anyone observing a sacred vow drinks wine here due to perversity, or if a Kshatriya or Vaishya drinks the extract of the Soma plant, the servants of Yama, so under sacred conditions where it's forbidden, strictly, they are taken to the Naraka called Ayapana, pressing their bosom with their foot. And further, for one who himself belonging to the lowest strata of society, refuses through self-esteem to respect here his superiors in pedigree, austerity, learning, pious conduct, varna, and ashrama, is as good as dead, and indeed suffers interminable tortures when thrown head foremost after death into the Naraka called Kshara Kardama. As regards men who propitiate goddess Bhadrakali, the god Bhairava, and other deities by sacrificing human beings to them. This is what I was referring to earlier with things like the Thuggy cult. And women who eat such human victims. The men slaughtered like beasts are reborn as the torturing agents in the form of troops of Rakshasas in the abode of Yama in the Naraka called Rakshagana Bhojana, and cutting up those men and women who had performed malicious human sacrifices on them into slices with their sword like butchers, drink their hot blood and dance and sing in merriment, even as those men and women who ate their human victims did here. Again, they who actually torture here in the woods or in villages, innocent creatures anxious to survive, inspiring them with confidence by allurements when they have come near and treating them as playthings when they have been transfixed with an iron pin or tied with a thread, like people who capture and torture animals for sadistic sport. Recollect their sin when their bodies too are transfixed with stakes, etc., in the course of tortures inflicted by Yama in the Naraka called Shulaprota on their death. And they are further tormented with hunger and thirst, and are assailed on every side, at every step, by buzzards, quails, and other birds with pointed bills. Again, those men who, fierce by nature like serpents, molest living beings here, themselves fall after their death into the hell called Dandashuka, where, O Raja, serpents with 5 and even 7 heads approach and devour them as they would devour rats. As regards these who actually shut up living beings here in dark holes, granaries, and caves, etc., the servants of Yama likewise thrust them into holes, etc., in the other world, in the Naraka called Avata Nirodhana, and confine them there with poisonous fire and smoke. Again, vultures, buzzards, crows, quails, and other birds with adamantine bills forcibly pluck out with great might in the naraka called Paryavartana the eyes of that sinful-eyed householder himself, who, full of wrath, looks on strangers or known visitors here with a malicious eye again and again, as if he would actually burn them. This is referring to like the concept of the evil eye, using it to cast curses more than just looking at someone harmlessly. Again, he who, proud of his opulence and full of egotism, looks askance at others and distrusts all, and who, with his heart and face withering through anxiety about his wealth being exhausted or lost, and himself knowing no peace of mind, guards his treasure like a devil, accumulates sin in the process of earning, augmenting, and preserving wealth, falls after his death into the naraka called Suchimukha, where it is said the servants of Yama, like, or here referred to Yama as Dharmadeva, since they are one and the same, like tailors, stitch all over the body of the sinful man, clinging to wealth like a demon. There are hundreds and thousands of such infernal spots in the abode of Yama, and all those treading the path of adharma, whosoever have been spoken of here, as well as those that have been left unmentioned, enter all these spots one after another, O ruler of the earth, depending on their karma. And even so, those following the path of dharma enter other regions, like Svarga. And with the residue of both punya and papa, they both return to this land of Bharatavarsha for rebirth. Bharatavarsha here not meaning India, but meaning our whole earth, and much more, as was described when they went over the layout of Jambudvipa. The path characterized by nivritti, or cessation of worldly activity, has been told in detail at the very outset of the Bhagavata. Of this extent only is the egg-shaped universe, which is depicted in the Puranas as divided into 14 lokas, and which is the well-known and grossest form of the Supreme Person, Bhagavan Narayana himself, consisting of the gunas of his own Maya. He who, full of reverence, reads, hears, or recites the account of it, as told, comes to realize even the incomprehensible aspect of the Supreme Spirit, the theme of the Upanishads, his mind being purified through faith and devotion. Having heard of the gross as well as of the subtle aspect of the Lord, the striver should gradually fix his mind with the help of his subtle intellect on the subtle aspect rather than on the gross aspect, the manifest universe, when it has been fully concentrated on the gross aspect. So naturally, our minds concentrate on the gross aspect of the Lord, the manifest world. We don't need to deliberately focus on the physical world. So what should gradually be done with the help of your intellect is to focus your subtle attention on the subtle aspect. In this way has been described by me for you, O Raja Parikshit, the relative position of the earth with its divisions and subdivisions, its dvipas and varshas, rivers and mountains, of the aerial region, the oceans and the subterranean regions, the quarters and the infernal regions, as well as the luminaries and the spheres, constituting the wonderful gross body of the Almighty Lord, the abode of all species of living beings. Thus ends the 26th discourse, entitled A Description of the Infernal Regions, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita, consisting of 18,000 shlokas, composed by the divine sage Veda Vyasa. And that is the end of Book 5. And I think, given our timing, it's a good place to end for today, and we can start the sixth skandha next time. I know the descriptions of the narakas are always intense, very much making a point of that any action that causes suffering will cause the same suffering back to you. And the Puranas often emphasize this point. Also, Garuda Purana emphasizes it a lot, to impress on people the importance of being careful not to cause suffering by your actions. But yeah, it's always kind of an intense chapter when it's dealing with narakas. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna Devala. Jai Shri Krishna, everybody. Would you have a time, or probably next time? I'd been dying to listen to your experience.
Yeah, I can. I can turn off the recording for that probably. Yeah. Let me pause the recording.